So, good afternoon, everyone, from Abbott 2026 in Dubai. My name is Manal Jamal. I'm the Medical Affairs Director for Abbott Diabetes Care. And it's an honor to have here with me Professor Chantal Mathieu, the President of the ASD, and also the Professor of Medicine at KU Leuven. Good afternoon, Professor.
Hi, Amal. Indeed, but I need to correct you because from the 31st of December 25, I am now the former president of ESD.
Okay.
My good colleague, Professor Francesco Giorgino, took over.
We're looking forward to work with Professor Giorgino,
Absolutely.
but until then we will enjoy working with you.
Yes, yeah. Now, but you may be interested, I'm now president of the European Diabetes Forum, which is the policy organ where ESD also works with the politicians in Europe.
Congratulations on the presidentship. So, Professor, since we're discussing here, at ADIC, all the new technologies in managing diabetes, and as we can see, the clinical standards in managing type 2 diabetes and recommendations on technology is also evolving. The previous presidential theme at ESD was rethinking diabetes from classification to personalization. How would you see the early adoption for technologies like continuous glucose monitors working in helping you identify the traits as a clinician and moving away from the tradition fail to treat with the current algorithms?
I think CGMs, the continuous glucose monitors or sensors, are really tools that help fight clinical inertia. In type 2 diabetes, there's no discussion that people who are treated with insulin benefit like any other person treated with insulin from sensors. So we won't discuss those on insulin, that's a given. But what we're discovering more and more is indeed, as you say, also in those not on insulin, CGM can really help people to understand their own behaviors. There's nothing more convincing to a person with diabetes if you see your blood sugar levels go up, if you've just eaten rice or if you've just eaten bread. I can say it 70 times to my patient, but one glucose curve is more convincing to see, oh yes, if I do that, then that happens. So I am a big believer in sensors, in CGMs, to use as educational tools and as ways to really make providers, so healthcare providers, but also the people themselves understand that they need to take action with drugs, but also with lifestyle, diet alterations, exercise, etc. So yes, I'm a big fan of CGM in type 2.
Thank you so much. So if also we see the guidelines like the ADA with the recent recommendations, they're also talking about what you have been highlighting of behavioral change and going to non-insulin therapy. How do you see the best way to support our colleagues in primary care in seeing the value of CGM as behavioral tool? We know that many of them do see that, but we still facing some challenges at that level.
We have to admit that if, as a healthcare provider, you want to exploit the CGM to the maximum, you need to adapt your own office to be able to read the CGM curves, for instance. All providers of CGMs, like Abbott, have very good tools to help doctors and nurses interpret the curves. And so imagine if you're a primary care doctor and in your office you cannot access that, or you're not used to accessing the tools that are provided by companies, then you lose half of the potential of the CGM. So that's my first message always to doctors, especially in primary care. Make sure that your office, that your setup is adapted for the novel technologies that bring the care for people with type 2 diabetes to the next level.
So it's setup and education as well, that also we are working
absolutely
with them.
And not only the doctors but also the nurses, the dietitians. For a dietitian, it's so useful to see the curves of a person with type 2 diabetes, again, when they're not on insulin, but it will give the dietitian clues where to have a discussion with the patient and say, what did you do, how can we change that?
Yeah. So I think we should look at CGM in primary care not just as a complex or a burden, but actually as a tool that helps us.
Absolutely.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. And going with the innovations and the technologies, and as we can see, we have so many CGMs now being offered to the patients and to the clinicians. And you have been a key leader and voice within Europe calling for more stringent, I would say, CGM quality standards or the enhanced CGM or the eCGM. So why do you think it is critical, not just for the patients who are on automated insulin delivery or they're using insulin, but also for the type 2 patients who are not on those medications? Why do you think these standards are of importance to the clinical community and the patients?
Yes, I mean, indeed, novel CGMs are coming and will come, and I support that. I embrace that we will see more affordable CGMs produced by different companies. And we can all agree that there are some features of CGMs that we don't need in people who are not on insulin. Hypo alarms if you're not using insulin or a sulfonylureum, we don't need them. Specific advice is not needed. So we can have less features, but we should not yield on the correctness of the readings, because the correctness of the reading is so essential for trusting the CGM. Because even if it's a person with type 2 diabetes on diet or a GLP-1 receptor agonist, they need to be relying on these glucose values. And so that's why we made quite a big fuss about the absence of content criteria to judge sensors. As you said, in particular, the sensors that we use in people on insulin. There we said you need minimum criteria. You need criteria on trials that have been done with these CGMs in people with type 1, in the whole age span, going from children to elderly individuals, and especially also testing the correctness of the sensor readings when the glucose is not stable, but when it's changing, going up or going down. So these are, how I would say, essential and non-negotiable features in sensors for people on insulin, but also important features for those not on insulin to have trustworthy sensors. And so I applaud the fact that we will get more affordable, even over-the-counter CGMs in the near future, but we need to know their quality. Because otherwise we lose on quality in the treatment of people with type 2 diabetes.
Thank you so much, Professor. And you know, here in the region we are also impacted and relying on those standards, for example, those coming from Europe. So I think, or do you think we can create bridges between ASD, EUDF and the local associations here to drive this awareness and talk to the regulators?
I would hope so. So FDA has their criteria for iCGM, but in Europe we just have a CE mark, and that CE mark gives a thumbs up or a thumbs down on the quality of the plastic, on sensors, etc. But for the rest, it is authorities, health authorities, that need to judge the sensors. And the only thing we wanted to say is that we need crystal clear criteria for judging these sensors. We don't doubt the expertise of the authorities, but we need to have open criteria so that indeed Europe can share them with other regions, and that you can also use these criteria for judging on the quality of a sensor. And again, we may have different requirements for sensors used in people with insulin and those without insulin, but we need to know how the sensor behaves.
Okay. Thank you so much, and we hope that the efforts pay off. There are certain, I think, improvements or moving ahead in Europe in that direction. It's taking a bit of time, but we do hope that for the safety of the patient and making sure that we're only providing to them what actually helps them and gives them a good outcomes. So speaking of innovation, as we continue on the continuous ketone monitoring or the dual glucose ketone sensor, you have been recently on an expert panel talking about the CKM thresholds. Where do you think the clinical applications for CKM fall, especially with the recent recommendations that you have published?
I mean, you touched on ketones. It's such an interesting time for us because we are getting more and more tools in our hands. And indeed, the glucose and ketone monitor will be the first one in our hands. But manufacturers are also looking at other metabolites, like lactate, for instance, which may have importance in physical exercise. Others are looking at potassium, for instance, which may be of importance for people with renal failure. But so coming back to the ketones, that is something we've been waiting for a long time. Because, for instance, diabetic ketoacidosis is still an issue in people using continuous subcutaneous insulin infusions or insulin pumps. So if something technically goes wrong, having an additional flag for the person next to glucose is important. So having these ketones is important. And then I would say it's double important for those on SGLT2 inhibitors. Ketoacidosis is rare in people with type 2 diabetes on SGLT2 inhibitors, but it happens. And it happens unexpectedly. And in people with type 1 diabetes, where we use SGLT2 inhibitors, which should officially, according to label, not happen, but we do it because of advantage for heart failure and kidney and what have you. But so in those, the risk of ketoacidosis is real. In people with type 1 on SGLT2, we know that despite good education, you have a risk of 2 to 4% per annum of diabetic ketoacidosis. So many examples where we would be interested. But let's go to the on-label indication. So measuring ketones in people with type 1 diabetes or measuring ketones in people with type 2 diabetes on SGLT2 inhibitors. So when we heard about these ketone monitors, we said, yes. And then they said, but what would be the cutoffs? How do we need to report it to the person using it? What would be alarm values, etc.? And then it becomes quite complex. I can tell you, we discussed hours and hours and hours. Should you have alarms with specific ketone thresholds? It's not obvious. Because all of us, if we stay fasted, we will have some ketones. And a person with type 1 diabetes very frequently has an individual ketone level. So we were quite surprised when we looked at studies, amongst other studies by Abbott, where they looked at individual ketone values of people just fasting and then shutting off the insulin pump and seeing how rapidly the ketones arrived. It's very individualized. And so how do you put an alarm? Do you put it at 3? Probably. Do you put it at 1? Go to the doctor or phone the doctor? But then the doctors will get a lot of phone calls. So it's not so easy. And you saw our consensus paper. It's a middle ground between getting alarms when you really need it or flags when you really need it. And on the other hand, not getting an overburden of alarms, because from the continuous glucose monitor, we know that having too many alarms just creates alarm fatigue, and people stop listening at the alarm. So it will be a work in progress, how we will use the CKMs and how Again, the way it's reported, the alarms will be adapted in the near future.
I agree with you, Professor. I think it's a highly potential or a new area for us to all learn about it. And I think also when you speak about the off-label indications, I think this could be helpful also to open doors for for the patients and for the clinicians. So let's hope the CKM or the DGK sensor, dual glucose ketone sensor, comes out soon so that we're all able to benefit and see that. So also at the ADIC, you're talking about the digital diabetes or the digital tools in diabetes management. So from your expertise, what is an advice that you give here to the clinicians in this region, knowing the high burden of diabetes and, you know, with those in this setup? So what is your key message to the clinicians on digital tools in diabetes?
Yes, my last slide of my talk, the one before last slide of my talk, is actually a triangle of decision. Not longer than 15 years ago, I gave talks on insulin pumps and new technologies, and we said it's the doctor, or rather the medical team with the nurses, who need to identify the right patients for these technologies. Now I turn the triangle around. Mm-hmm. Now I say, as a medical team, you need to reflect, why not? I think everybody on insulin, type 1, type 2, pancreatic causes, whatever, should have a CGM. This is the standard. But in people with type 1 diabetes, again, looking at learned societies and their advice, like ADA, the Canadians, etc., to me the standard is now very rapidly becoming the automated insulin delivery. So the hybrid closed-loop systems. And I think now doctors and medical teams should not ask the question, who is the best person for these technologies, but why not in this person? And I think very rapidly automated insulin delivery systems, pumps and sensors and algorithms are becoming the standard of care in people with type 1 diabetes. Yeah. And so we as doctors, we as nurses should not be arrogant and say, nah, this patient is not clever enough, or she cannot do it, or whatever. Everybody should be offered it. And we have now very, very simple tools. I hear that Omnipod just launched in Emirates, yes, where you can combine with Dexcom or with the Abbott sensor. So this is really easy tools. It's patch pumps. It's very accepted by patients. So to me, this is the new reality for people with type 1 diabetes. Why not an automated insulin delivery system in this person, yes, with type 1?
I agree with you, Professor. I mean, we are beyond the point of considering somebody too stupid or too dumb to use technology. I think technology is accessible.
And if I can be feminist,
yes,
all too often doctors say she's a woman, she's not very tech savvy. But first of all, it's not true. Women are as tech savvy as men. But again, these new systems are so easy to use and so you almost feel it. There's no reason to say, at least we will not try it in this person. Try it, yes, and then see if he or she doesn't like it.
Exactly. Give it a try, see how it works, and then we leave the patient or for themselves to judge, but at least give them this option. So, you also mentioned early on the talk that certain features or certain technical specifications shouldn't be in the product. Like, for example, if I don't need alarms or I don't need, say, keto monitoring, for example. Do you believe that in CGMs specifically, we should go for diversification of the products so that we can offer different options for the different patients? Unlike what's happening right now, we have
one size fits all. Yes, absolutely. And there we are handicapped, of course, by instances. And again, I know it's being recorded, but I will say it anyway. Instances like the regulators, like FDA, who say, "Oh no, you need alarms that you cannot shut off at 50." Yeah, I mean, I believe in customizability, in personalized approaches. If you're a person with type 2 diabetes who wants a sensor for, motivating yourself for lifestyle, you don't need all these alarms. You need to be able to shut them off or not have them. If you're a person with newly diagnosed type 2 and again you use it for motivation, you don't need to be able to measure to the milligram above 300 milligram per deciliter. You will never get there. So I think, yes, products that will be or customizable, one product where you can shut off specific features, or sensors that are for people with type 2, not on insulin, for people on insulin, for people together with a pump, etc.
Okay. So thank you so much, Professor. I really learned so much from our talk, and I wish you to enjoy the rest of the ADEC. Again, thank you so much for your time, Professor. This has been a great discussion.
My pleasure.
So much. Of course. Thank you, Professor.